The carjackings in DC have gotten so bad that they even tried to carjack a U.S. Marshal protecting an anti-gun Supreme Court justice. So let's go ahead and talk about it. The Supreme Court is really divided up into two different factions. You have the six justice conservative factions, even though they don't always rule for the conservative side. The majority of the time, they do rule for the conservative side. And then you have the liberal faction, which always rules for the progressive issues. One of the cases that they have ruled on in the past is Heller. And the liberal justices try to say that the individual does not have a right to bear arms. One of the key dissenters in that case is Sonia Sotomayor. Sonia Sotomayor is a Supreme Court justice that is probably one of the most anti-gun Supreme Court justices ever. And during the Heller decision, she tried to argue that gun rights is not an individual right, and that the Second Amendment only applies to organized militias such as the military. I know the military and militias are not the same thing, but she tried to argue that they were. Now, let's get to what happened recently. Sonia Sotomayor lives in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has a huge issue with carjackings. You are more likely to be carjacked in Washington, D.C. than almost anywhere in the country. And since she lives in Washington, D.C., there's always going to be a couple of U.S. Marshals that are tasked with protecting Supreme Court justices stationed outside her home. And at 1:15 a.m., a 18-year-old kid tried to carjack one of these U.S. Marshals. Well, guess what happened? This genius didn't realize that he was trying to carjack a U.S. Marshal, and that U.S. Marshal pulled out his sidearm and shot him. Now, he's in the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, and that's good because I don't want to see anyone die. A second U.S. Marshal that was parked nearby also engaged the suspect. So they got the kid in custody, and he was carrying a Smith & Wesson 40 VE, which is a terrible handgun, by the way, especially since it's in 40. But that's just my personal opinion. The kid is being charged with armed carjacking. Also, he's being charged with carrying a firearm without a license, which shouldn't be a thing, and carrying a firearm with a large capacity magazine, which also shouldn't be a thing. The armed carjacking, yeah, I can see why he's getting charged with that, but the other two charges, I think, are BS and unconstitutional. But we're not here to discuss that. What we are here to discuss is the hypocritical nature of the elites that are in power, including Associate Justice Sotomayor. Associate Justice Sotomayor hates guns. She has never, ever done a pro-gun ruling in her career. But yet, she depends on people sitting outside her home armed to protect her from people. But she does not afford the same protections to you or me. Basically, she is saying that she has more of a right to self-defense than we do. And she gets armed guards. So she doesn't need to carry a gun because she is protected. While you and I, we don't have armed guards, so we must take it upon ourselves to protect ourselves and our families. But she does not want us to have firearms because to her, our lives are not worth as much as her life. DC is also crime-ridden. It's the murder capital of the United States. There's tons of carjackings, and it's just a really bad place to be right now with all the crime on the rise in the nation's capital. I live right outside DC in Virginia, and once you cross the bridge into Virginia, the crime rate drops. If you go the other way into Maryland, the crime rate drops, but not by anywhere near the crime rate drop once you cross into Virginia. And Maryland is still really restrictive when it comes to guns, and DC is restrictive when it comes to guns. And you see a higher crime rate in those two areas, but you don't see the carjackings and you don't see the violent crimes in Virginia that you do in Maryland and DC. But it doesn't matter to the elites in DC. So I have a challenge for Sotomayor, and this is the challenge. Give up your armed security. Go without any firearms and without any armed security as you want us to do. See how safe you are. You should not have special privileges because you are part of the elite class. Live like us plebes out here, or how you would like us plebes to live, disarmed and in fear. That is what you want. That is how the elites keep control. The firearm is the great equalizer, and it gives me the ability to protect myself and my family. And yet, this Supreme Court justice wants to strip me of that right while keeping her own armed security staff, which I believe is really, really hypocritical. Also, the situation shows that gun laws are not effective. The kid that tried to hold up the U.S. Marshal and try to steal his car did not have a gun license, which shouldn't be a thing. He had a high capacity magazine, which shouldn't be illegal, and he got the gun illegally. So all the gun laws that they put in place in DC, which have some of the most strict gun laws in the country, did nothing to prevent this kid from trying to carjack a U.S. Marshal. Now, he's probably not a brain surgeon, considering that he tried to carjack a U.S. Marshal in front of a Supreme Court Justice's house, but that is another subject to begin with all whatsoever. But it shows you that the gun laws in DC do not work. They did not prevent this kid from getting a gun. They did not prevent this kid from trying to carjack someone with a gun. And they did not prevent this kid from breaking the law. What did stop this kid was a guy that's trained in firearms, armed with a firearm. He was able to protect himself and the Supreme Court justice and stop the carjacking. Not only does this situation prove that gun laws are ineffective and do not work, and all they do is put law-abiding citizens in danger, but it also proves another thing, and that thing is to stop an armed bad guy, you need an armed good guy. And that is exactly what happened in this case. An armed good guy was able to stop an armed bad guy. And now if this kid got away with carjacking in this car, he might have hurt someone else, because this is probably not his first rodeo. This is probably not the first car he carjacked. And if he would have got away, that wouldn't be the last car that he carjacked. And he might have ended up killing someone in the process of stealing a car. So it's really good that they got him off the streets. Now, will he stay off the streets with our criminal justice system? I kind of doubt it. He'll probably be thrown back into the wild, where he will continue his criminal career. But that is a topic for another day. I just wanted to highlight this situation and let you know what is going on, so you can point out the hypocrisy of the anti-gun side and point to the fact that gun laws do not work. They didn't work in this case. They didn't work in a lot of cases in DC or Chicago or any of the other big Democratic-run cities around the country. And the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is to be a good guy with a gun. All right, guys, that is it. If you like my video, go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe. It would really help me out. My name is John Crump. I'm an investigative journalist, and this is my channel, John Crump News, where we do 2A almost every day. So I hope you guys have a great day. Stay ever vigilant, stay ever free, keeping the fight. I am out of here. See ya.